Roberts. I was born in 1822 in South Carolina. I'm the oldest of 12 children. But my real adventures in life didn't begin until I met and married Mr. John Black Smith. Mr. Smith was a fine gentleman. Soon after marriage, we moved, first to Georgia and then to Mississippi. And it was there in Mississippi that I took on a new role in life, that of mother. Our first 3 children were born in Mississippi, a son, then 2 daughters. Now, Mr. Smith decided that we should move again to McNairy County in Tennessee. Mr. Smith was an industrious man of considerable means, and he set about right away building our plantation. There was a big, beautiful home, painted white, and we named our plantation White House. Now, also on the plantation was a general store, a blacksmith shop, a gin, and a smokehouse. It is grueling work to run a plantation. There's the livestock to look after, the children, the house, the gardens, and the servants. And many times these tasks fell to me. You see, Mr. Smith was a member of the Tennessee legislature from 1855 to 1856. And those duties took him to Nashville on business quite often. We did have an overseer at one time, but I never really liked the man, and I thought some of his ways were questionable. So I took on running that plantation myself. Our garden was surrounded by purple and white lilacs, roses, hollyhocks, and morning glory. I also raised turkeys, chicken, guinea hen, and geese. On top of that, well, at that plantation I bore 5 more children. Now in 1857, Mr. Smith and his brother Stuart decided they would take a trip to Texas. They were so pleased with what they found that both men bought property near the community of Swan. It was an exciting new frontier, and both men wanted to be a part of that. Sadly, just 2 short years later, Mr. Smith died before we could make that move to Texas. You see, he had gotten a haircut, and he went out riding on the plantation rounding up hogs and caught his death of pneumonia. He was only 45, and baby Annie only 2 months old. Mr. Smith believed in women's rights, so I was given the opportunity to settle his estate without a will. Soon his brother Stuart contacted me and urged me to move to Texas. You see, Stuart had already moved to Swan and had witnessed the resurrection of a Texas rainstorm after the drought. So I spent the next several months finishing up my late husband's estate, and I leased out that plantation. My dear friends made me a friendship quilt to take to my new home in Texas, with one of their names on each of the squares. It was a sweet reminder of each one of them. Sadly, Stuart died, but not before he had charged his son with helping us make that trip. We moved in buggy, on horseback, 2 wagons, one pulled by mules, another one by 4 oxen, and we packed only the bare necessities to try and keep our load as light as possible. You see, it was myself, my servants, and 6 of my children. Florence had already moved to Texas, and my oldest son, Julius, was in Mississippi. By the grace of God and sheer determination, we made that trip in just 6 weeks. We arrived in Smith County December 1861, and I found the inhabitants to be friendly, and welcoming. And we lived in Tyler proper until 1862. In fact, some of our dearest neighbors were Judge and Mrs. Stephen Reeves. In fact, when I met and married Mr. Thomas Roberts, our wedding ceremony was held in the Reeves parlor. Mr. Thomas and I moved to my farm in Swan. And although my life had many new beginnings, my thoughts always went back to my oldest son, Julius. He held a special place in my heart. I heard he was married, so through several contacts, I was able to send my daughter-in-law a letter. Imagine my joy when I received a reply. And as I read that letter, my joy turned to deep sorrow as I learned that Julius had been killed in battle in Mississippi. My daughter-in-law was able to recover his body, and he was buried in his uniform as he had served loyally. My sorrow was sweetened a little bit as I read that I had 2 grandchildren. A little boy named after his daddy, Julius, and a girl, Matilda Caroline, named after me. I knew in my heart I'd probably never meet these grandchildren, but it was sweet knowing I had a namesake in this world. I was truly blessed that 7 of my 8 children remained close to me my entire life. In fact, 3 of my daughters married Tyler men of prominence. Josephine married a Mr. Benjamin Smith, and Florence married a Mr. Mark Fleschel. I understand there's a paved road just east of downtown named Fleschel Avenue, and it gives me great pride to have my son-in-law remembered so honorably. Now, Mr. Smith and Fleschel ran a very successful mercantile in Tyler. They sold dry goods, groceries, notions, and hardware. And those men had the largest selection of boots and shoes in all of Smith County. They were very accommodating to their customers and family alike. Now, my 3rd daughter, Alice, she married Captain James P. Douglas. Mr. Douglas was a newspaper publisher, an educator, a railroad organizer, and a business and civic leader. But he's probably best known for his participation and his leadership in the war against the states, between the states. Now, Mr. Douglas was commissioned to raise military artillery from Smith County. He did this, and it was named the Douglas Battery. Now, the Douglas Battery was the only Texas artillery to serve east of the Mississippi. In fact, they engaged in all the great battles in Tennessee. In 1865, that battery was retired, and Mr. Douglas returned here to my daughter and Tyler. I lived out my days in Swan and Tyler, doting on my grandchildren and helping my children as well as I could. And in 1892, Oakwood became my final home. And I was sure it was by the insistence of my daughter Alice, who was loving and devoted, that I be laid here in the Douglas plot. It gives me great joy also to see that my children engraved upon my headstone the word that gave me the greatest joy in life and that I consider one of my greatest accomplishments, that of mother. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about me. Captain Douglas and my daughter Alice are buried here, along with 2 of my granddaughters who devoted their entire lives to the Tyler educational system. Enjoy the rest of your tour. Thank you. that canopy is